President Donald Trump has finally conceded his defeat to Democrat Joe Biden in the November 3rd election. The Venezuelan Parliament unanimously approved the draft bill on the defense of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Essequibo Region. Brazil is closing in on a tragic milestone with almost 200,000 COVID-19 fatalities as the epidemic continues to rage in the South American giant. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. U.S. President Donald Trump has finally conceded his defeat to Joe Biden in the November 3rd election. Addressing the nation this Thursday, one day after the events in the Capitol in Washington, D.C., which resulted in 5 fatalities, and in the face of widespread condemnation of his role in inciting the violence, Trump acknowledged that a new administration will be inaugurated on January the 20th, but fell short of congratulating Biden on his victory.
To begin by addressing the heinous attack on the United States Capitol. Like all Americans, I am outraged by the violence, lawlessness, and mayhem.
According to sources in the United States, President Donald Trump is considering granting himself a self-pardon before leaving office. According to reports, the conversations with top aides have happened in recent weeks. However, it's not clear if the issue has been discussed between the president and his advisors since the riots on Capitol Hill this Wednesday. Following the events there, Trump's White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, advised the president that he could face legal jeopardy for encouraging his supporters to storm the Capitol building, according to sources familiar with their discussions. If a self-pardon happens, it's unclear when it will be announced. Trump is already expected to issue several pardons over the next 2 weeks. And also, the chief of police responsible for defending the U.S. Capitol, Stephen Sund, resigned on Thursday evening after his force came under fierce criticism for his handling of the angry mob of Trump supporters on Wednesday. Sund's resignation will go into effect on January the 16th, just a few days before President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. His decision came just hours after the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, called for him to go. It also came after leaders across the U.S. Capitol demanded an investigation into how law enforcement failed to stop the rioters, despite multiple warnings that they intended to storm the Capitol complex. Joe Biden early on Thursday criticized what he described as a double standard between how police reacted to the pro-Trump mob versus how they treated supporters of Black Lives Matter over the summer. And the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, has called to invoke the 25th Amendment against President Donald Trump following the events of this Wednesday at the Capitol.
Just for information of some, when you have the 25th Amendment invoked, that would be calling upon the Vice President, as we hope to do, to take the lead and with a majority of the cabinet to be able to unseat the President of the United States. A very dangerous person who should not continue in office. This is urgent. This is emergency of the highest magnitude.
And U.S. President-elect Joe Biden condemned President Donald Trump on Thursday, a day after his supporters smashed their way into the Capitol, stressing that the outgoing president was responsible for one of the darkest days in the U.S. history.
In my view, one of the darkest days in the history of our nation. An unprecedented assault on our democracy. An assault literally on the citadel of liberty in the United States Capitol itself. An assault on the rule of law.
And the U.S. authorities identified the San Diego woman who was fatally shot by police inside the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday as Ashley Babbitt. Babbitt was shot as rioters were moving toward the House chamber after entering the Capitol. According to reports, she had a history of social media rants against many of President Donald Trump's favorite targets, illegal immigration, Musk, and his critics. The police of the District of Columbia have identified the 3 other people who had medical emergencies and died during the storming of the Capitol: a 55-year-old man from Alabama, a 34-year-old woman from Georgia, and a 50-year-old from Pennsylvania. And we'll go now to a short break, but stay with us.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on teleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on teleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. During its first ordinary session, the Venezuelan Parliament unanimously approved the draft bill on the defense of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Essequibo Region. The bill was presented by lawmaker Diosdado Cabello. The document condemns the ruling of the International Court of Justice declaring it has jurisdiction to hear a territorial dispute between Guyana and Venezuela over the demarcation of their land and the border at the Essequibo territory. Thus, the Venezuelan government reaffirmed its historical position of recognizing the Geneva Agreement as the only mechanism to resolve the territorial dispute.
The lawmakers who agreed to approve the bill presented to reject the decision of the International Court of Justice on the dispute between the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela with respect to the territory of Essequibo. Please indicate so as usual. Approved unanimously.
And the new National Assembly of Venezuela announced an investigation against the previous opposition majority in parliament, which will be led by lawmaker Jose Brito, who broke ties with Juan Guaidó after being accused of corruption by the opposition leader and in rejection of his baseless claims that he was the president of Venezuela.
We have formed a special commission to investigate these crimes, to bring to light the excesses committed, so that every Venezuelan knows the extent of the damage they have done to the peaceful life of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
The investigations must be made deeper, and as a result of these investigations, pages will be written that should be known to all Venezuelan people of future generations, so these facts are not repeated. Justice will act decisively with all the force that the people are giving it in this new stage of our revolution and our history.
In Venezuela, President Nicolás Maduro Moros held a meeting with the defense and state councils of the Bolivarian nation regarding the Essequibo.
Today we made a call to officially hold the permanent and joint session of the National Defense Council and the Council of State to attend all that has to do with this affair, this infamous and unjust legal decision that the International Court of Justice took against Venezuela in relation to the issue of the Guayana Essequibo on December 18, 2020, 3 weeks ago. We were waiting for the installation of the new National Assembly as a legislative power for this National Defense Council to be installed with all the power of the Venezuelan state in permanent in joint session, to consult with the whole country, all the law faculties, all organizations, experts in the field of international defense in the Essequibo. I want to hear them all, to strengthen the position of Venezuela before international organizations, to strengthen the defense of our country and our historical rights over the Guayana Essequibo.
Also, the Venezuelan president referred to a letter addressed on the behalf of the nation to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, to request his assistance in the face of unilateral actions of the International Court of Justice.
I have here a letter, which I have already signed, which will be delivered to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, first thing in the morning. Dr. Escarra, Dr. Timoteo Zambrano, Deputy Ilenia Medina, Member Earl Herrera are part of the diplomatic actions to respond to this unjust, infamous, anti-juridical decision of the International Court of Justice of last December 18th.
Brazil is closing in on a tragic milestone this Thursday, with almost 200,000 COVID-19 fatalities as the epidemic continues to rage in the largest country in South America. During the last 24-hour period, over 1,500 people have died from the disease. Infections and fatalities continue to challenge state and federal health authorities, working with a patchwork of policies that show little effectiveness in curtailing the rising toll. However, there is a glimmer of hope at the Brazilian Biological Research Center, the Butantan Institute, whose director announced that a Chinese-made vaccine candidate is showing promising results. Brazilian federal health authorities charged with approving new treatments are still studying whether to issue an emergency approval for the vaccine's distribution, but public pressure could force an imminent approval as grieving families bury loved ones in increasingly crowded cemeteries.
The solution is there, but because of this political fight and this delay, and it seems to me that the number of deaths will increase even more. Lots of families destroyed due to the COVID. Unfortunately, tonight we are going to reach the terrible, sad, and tragic mark of 200,000 Brazilians who lost their lives from COVID-19. So, today, January the 7th, is the day of life, is the day of existence. Besides all the precautions that we should still have during the year, we have hope, vaccine hope.
The Colombian President Iván Duque and the Mayor of Bogotá, Claudia López, explained the need to restrict mobility in the capital this Thursday as the city prepares for a 5-day lockdown. The country has seen a surge in COVID-19 infections, reporting the second highest number of cases in South America and the third highest death toll. The restrictions apply to 2/3 of its 50 million citizens in a bid to relieve fast-growing pressure on hospitals.
Taking into account that these days are always challenging, especially from the point of view of national logistics, let's put as little pressure as possible on the increased use of intensive care units. That's the reason behind the restrictions on mobility. That's why the restrictions on alcohol consumption and the decisions that are made in different circumstances, areas, and in hand with local governments to minimize road accidents, minimize fights, that also exert pressure on intensive care units.
And we have more news coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. French Prime Minister Jean Castex outlined the government's strategy for speeding up the COVID-19 vaccination campaign nationwide, specifying in particular that people aged over 75 will be able to be vaccinated from January 18th. The Prime Minister also announced plans to extend the current curfew to 10 departments of the country.
More than 45,000 people have already been vaccinated in the last 5 days. And secondly, people over 75 years of age will be able to be vaccinated from Monday 18th January. The latest figures led us to identify 10 additional departments, mostly located in the east of France, where the question of an implementation of this advanced curfew could also be raised. As we did last week, the prefects will very quickly conduct the necessary consultations with the elected officials of these territories to analyze the situation, and, depending on their reports, decisions will be taken by tomorrow evening to come into force from Sunday.
And Spain's total number of coronavirus infections surged past 2 million on Thursday as cases jumped following the Christmas holidays. The milestone came as the health ministry announced another 42,360 new cases over the past 48 hours.
The evolution of the data continues to be clearly upward, as we mentioned at the beginning of the week, and the total of confirmed cases notified by the autonomous communities by the surveillance system now exceed 2 million cases, 2,024,904 cases that we have been notified as confirmed to the Ministry of Health. The impact on the circulation of cases in the increase of cases that is having is not the main factor. The British strain, of course, we are finding it, has been circulating for several months, especially since October circulating in the United Kingdom. It is logical that we are finding cases in all European countries.
Japan's government declared a month-long coronavirus state of emergency in the greater Tokyo area on Thursday, as the capital reported another record surge in daily infections. Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga described a great sense of crisis as he announced the measure, which begins this Friday.
First, the bars and restaurants close at 8 p.m. Second, reduce commuting by 70% thanks to remote working. Third, avoid any unnecessary outing after 8 p.m. Fourth, put in place restrictions on the capacity to host concerts, sporting events, and other gatherings. Infection among the younger generations is an important factor in the spread of the virus. I therefore invite you to act to save the precious lives of all generations, those of your parents, grandfathers, grandmothers, and friends.
And people in the Japanese capital reacted to the declaration of a new state of emergency in the face of rising coronavirus cases.
It's a big city where lots of people gather, so in a way it's inevitable that the number of infections goes up. But in this second round of virus emergency, many events will have to be cancelled. This year's coming-of-age day events are already cancelled. It's tough, painful, to be honest.
Even more people will get sacked and become jobless in this situation. The government's support for these people is not enough at all. The coronavirus has been a problem since early last year. In my opinion, the government is really late in taking action.
And the capital of North China's Hebei province has tightened travel restrictions as the city enters its second day of mass COVID-19 testing. The provincial capital launched a citywide testing campaign on Wednesday as it faces the country's biggest COVID-19 outbreak in months, with more than 100 cases reported in the past few days.
COVID-19 outbreak happening right around us, I am more worried than before. As a Jiangsuan local, I love the city and worry about it. However, I still believe the outbreak will be contained very soon. Stay strong, Jiangsuan. We will prevail. Here in Jiangsuan, we take 10 samples and test them at the same time. It is a standard operation to increase efficiency while maintaining accuracy. Using this method, we can get accurate test results quickly.
The Turkish foreign minister stated this Thursday that his country is ready to normalize relations with France, despite continued bilateral tensions over several issues.
Is not categorically against France. But France has been against Turkey categorically since the Operation Peace Spring against PKK terrorist organization at the northeastern part of Syria, just at the other side of our border. And recently also we criticized for what happened in France, and also the statements, we responded, the statements came from France. At the end, we had a very constructive phone conversation with French counterpart, Jean-Yves Le Drian, and we agreed that we should work on a roadmap to normalize the relations. And his Secretary General and my ambassador met in Paris to that end, and we have been working on an action plan or roadmap to normalize the relations, and it has been going well.
Zimbabwe's President Emerson Mnangagwa took to Twitter this Thursday to call for an end to the sanctions imposed by the United States government against his country. The tweet emphasized that the Trump administration extended sanctions on Zimbabwe last year, citing concerns about democracy in the country, and pointed out that the events seen in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday show that the U.S. has no moral right to punish another nation under the guise of upholding democracy. Several nations and analysts have pointed to the crisis of supposed democracy in the United States and the irony of the fact that the scenes witnessed in Washington on Wednesday are not uncommon in other parts of the world, where coups are supported and also supported by the U.S. against legitimate, democratically elected governments that do not submit to the imperialist interest. And a group of military officers burst onto the floor of Ghana's parliament on Wednesday night after an apparent dispute between ruling and opposition party lawmakers ahead of Thursday's swearing-in ceremony of the president of the country and the new speaker of the parliament. Chaotic scenes erupted after a governing party deputy tried to seize the ballot box during the vote for parliament speaker. The ensuing clash lasted several hours until the army stepped in, with the national television broadcasting the drama live. The new parliament is split down in the middle between the two main parties, posing the risk of a gridlock on tackling the country's problem. The West African nation has a reputation as one of the continent's most politically stable countries. President Nana Akufo-Addo has sworn in for a second term on Thursday after winning 51.3% of the vote, but former President John Dramani Mahama, who received 47.3%, has refused to concede defeat and petitioned the Supreme Court to overturn the results. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, hundreds of migrants await the construction of a new refugee camp following the burning of a center near the border with Croatia. The Lipa camp near the city of Bihać hosted about 130,000 refugees who have been left vulnerable to the low temperatures of the current European winter. The refugee center was reportedly set on fire on 23 December following the withdrawal from the site of the International Organization for Migration. All this after international organizations repeatedly denounced the precarious conditions to which around 6,000 migrants residing in the country in refugee camps are exposed. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.